It is the year 2472, and the Earth has suffered a great calamity. Hundreds of years of popular culture have vanished. Without the sacred films and texts for guidance, civilization is devoid of anything cool. Then, 3 incubation chambers are unearthed, and from within, men from the time of the great blockbusters emerge. Now, through highly interesting conversations, they share invaluable insight about what once was. The movies, the shows, the comics, toys, and books. This is
The Hyperspace.
Podcasting in the 25th century.
Welcome in, podcast pioneers, to the Hyperspace. Podcasting in the 25th century, the interweb's first and only podcast. My name's Matt.
I'm Jared.
I'm like,
Season 7, rocking on.
Yes, we're starting season 7 with a giant 2-parter.
Is it the best?
It is the best. As a matter of fact, still the only podcast on the internet.
Amazing. After all this time,
Nobody picked up on it. I don't know what the heck's going
I
on.
don't think anybody can handle it, man.
It's a large responsibility.
that's probably what it is.
It has to be.
What's going on? Anything new in the world?
Well, the world of the 25th century, Matt, is a strange and dangerous place. I have nothing really new going on here. As you can see, it's a beautiful day outside of my fake windows and my tube.
Weather control, always doing its job well.
Yes. Actually, those are just holographic screens, as we are, of course, underground in a tube.
That's true. Mike, how are you?
Good. How are you?
You're good, man.
Have you finished the shed for your
I want a
tube
shed
yet?
update.
Ooh. No, it's not done.
And you got to
Getting
be
there.
careful.
It's getting there. Getting close.
What happens if it rains? Does rain get inside it?
Yes, but the wood I bought for the flooring is very much waterproof. So
It will stand up to bum urine.
yes, bum urine. And
Well, I remember you got quite a good look at some bum urine when you were shopping for sheds.
yeah, did I recount that?
Yes, in the first episode of the season, you told us about shed shopping.
And find out the one I didn't mean to buy, but I accidentally bought had homeless people squatting in it. So yeah, that was
Quite literally. So guys, this is going to be part 2 of what we started with our season 1 premiere. So, Mike, why don't you remind them what loyalty is?
loyalty is when you what a way to put me on the spot.
But you had such an eloquent intro
it's
to
funny
last
because
week's episode.
As
Is it
I-
elegant?
As I edited that yesterday, I was thinking to myself, like, wow, that was such a great description of it. Maybe I should just like cut it and put it in this one and have him replay
Just
it.
paste it.
I'll give a shorter loyalty is when you are a fan of something and you stick with it through the highs and the lows.
And as we said, sometimes loyalty turns to obligation, and obligation turns into apathy.
It's true.
And then sometimes it turns into abandonment. Where you
And sometimes it turns into Chinese democracy.
where you just
Which
kind
is-
of quit. You're just
which
like,
is-
nope.
Yeah, that's
And
sort of where we
that-
left things last
That is
week.
really, I think, the best, the true omega from that alpha is Chinese democracy. I mean, if you have something that you love that you turn to hate, it's called a Chinese democracy from this point.
Well, when last we parted, one of you guys said, "Hey, I'm going to play Chinese Democracy just because I don't think I've ever finished the album." Did
So
you guys-
yeah, so I actually put it onto my phone to listen to, and
Did you get through it?
no, here's the deal. So every morning I take my youngest to school, and then
you
as it stands
didn't
now,
play it for dear God. You didn't play it for him. Did you?
no. So for her, and I pick
Oh,
her
sorry.
up now because we're in between babysitters, and usually on the way home, she falls asleep. So I'm like, this is like my time to listen to whatever I want to, right? But she's been awake. It's like she knows I have Chinese democracy on my phone.
How old is
knows-
she?
and, like she's 4, just turning 4. And it's almost as if there's something in the world in the atmosphere telling me not to listen to it. And I keep waiting for it to fall asleep so I can hit play. It's ready to go, but no.
That's probably for the best. Your daughter's protecting you.
I'm gonna listen to it. I'm going to bear it.
Okay. That reminds me of something that that pushing through something to listen to it. That reminds me of this doesn't really have anything to do with the topic, but I have to mention it. One time, Mike, about 20 years ago, we all are familiar with this. There was something called the Star Wars musical.
Best.
And that which probably, in all fairness, deserves its own episode.
Darth Vader.
But I remember
that was from Donnie. That was wasn't that Donnie Maurice?
No.
Well,
that was Darth Vader's Raiders.
This was someone who made it in like a Andrew Lloyd Webber Phantom of the Opera style.
Darth Vader.
That was great.
Dark Lord of the Sith.
Until you found those plans, and bring me the passengers, every child, woman, and man.
And they had a whole like really at the time a lot of money put into animating it to like.
I think I only did the one song.
One season more is what they did. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was like
well,
memorable.
So what I remember about this is, for some reason, I remember this. Me and Mike were going from someplace back to my house.
Right.
And Mike was driving in front of me. And he got to my house, 30 seconds before I did, and he got out of the car. And he said, "Man, for the last 30 minutes, I've been listening to the Star Wars musical." And he's like, I'm going to finish it. I'm going to finish it. But he's like, but man, I tell you what, it's taken a lot out of me. And
I went on that journey too. It was.
I don't remember it. I don't remember listening to it.
I can't.
must have blocked
you were
it
listening
out.
to it in your car, and because you had it. This is of course when iPods were the big thing, and you'd put it on your iPod, and you were listening to it. And I still think I have it in my online library.
It's on my computer.
Yeah,
right
yeah.
now.
I still
have it floating around as well.
It's amazing.
We have to talk about that someday. But today, speaking of pushing through things,
man, I'm glad you mentioned that. Though I forgot about that.
Dark Lord of the Sith. Okay, so when last we parted, we were talking about Guns N' Roses and the tragic decline of that group. Matt, you had also mentioned Pink Floyd.
Yeah,
and
Metallica.
Def Leppard was thrown in the mix there.
I want to throw in, I don't know if I got into it, but I do need to mention of all the things I have been loyal to and that I think has had a major payoff.
Roxette?
Yes, definitely. Is Iron Maiden.
Oh, yeah.
You mentioned Iron Maiden?
No,
you haven't talked about it.
You talk about it every other episode. So,
yeah, please.
I mean,
I thought this would be your final one.
Now we're still on loyalty, right?
Well, we're just working our way through it. I don't think we need to put up walls. Let's just, Okay.
Yeah, Iron Maiden is a band that I've been listening to since I've been middle school, and I have to say, they've had their ups and downs, but every album I can listen to every album. There's something. There's only one album I would say is not my favorite, but even when Bruce left for 2 albums, I even like those 2. But I mean, you talk about a band that has really just done something no other band has done, and it's just consistently put out great music. They've retained their sound, but at the same time, they haven't, like, AC/DC, every album sounds like an AC/DC album. That nothing wrong with that. I'm not. But every Maiden album sounds like a Maiden album, but they've grown musically, and their last album, Senjutsu, golly, it was so good. And considering that they started in like 1976,
You know, I have never in my entire life ever listened to any Iron Maiden albums. And you know,
missing out.
I've listened to a ton of stuff, and I don't know how that hasn't like come into my radar, but I have yet to put an Iron Maiden album on. You know, I should. Mike, which one should I start with? Then don't tell me the first one. What's the best one?
Well, the first one's kind of strange because it's got a different singer, even though it is good. But
Right.
Peace of Mind or Power Slave. I mean, those are the two. That's like their peak when they were in the 80s. At the peak in the 80s, those two were their peak albums.
Hmm.
And then you have like the big ones through Seventh Son. Then they did No Prayer for the Dying, which was this really weird album, and Adrian Smith had left. And they did Fear of the Dark, which was better, but still felt off. And then Bruce left, and they did two with Blaze Bayley, X Factor, Virtual 11. But I like those albums. A lot of fans, you know, anytime something changes, fans are like, oh, no, it's terrible. They're not terrible. They're actually pretty good albums. But then Bruce came back and Adrian came back at the same time. And they've been the same band since 2000. And oh my gosh, it's just each album. Like I said, this last album they put out is just fantastic. It's unbelievable how good it is. And I just saw them with my son on this latest tour, and they're just fantastic. I mean, they're just a great band. And also they just seem like pretty down to earth guys, you know. You know,
Well, they got to be what? They're in their 70s by now, right?
Not yet. They're mid 60s.
Okay.
But and they're just great band, great album covers with Eddie, you know. And anytime you see an interview with like Steve Harris, who's the founder, he just seems like this totally laid back guy who's just like, yeah, we make music. That's what we do.
Did one of the band members do the cover art for all this stuff? Is there somebody who's consistent?
It used to be, it was consistent up until No Prayer for the Dying with an artist named Derek Riggs, and he's really responsible for Eddie.
I mean, that's that metal look. They defined the metal.
Well,
look,
he also did my favorite album cover, Somewhere in Time, which was a Cyborg Eddie, which is just a fantastic album cover. But they kind of had a little bit of a falling out with Derek Riggs, and they've sort of let other artists come in and kind of, you know, most of them have been good. You have a couple misses, but they have a guy that they've worked with a couple. They have a couple, I can't remember their names, that they've worked with more than once, but and then there's the Dance of Death album cover, which was it was a CG art, and the guy didn't finish the artwork, but they used it anyway. He wanted to take his name off of it. It's really a weird looking album cover. It's a great album. It's just not a great album cover.
Yeah.
But anyway, that is a band that I'm proud to say I'm an Iron Maiden fan, because, you know, they're just so good. And my son's, my youngest, I was coming back from baseball and he was listening and singing along to Iron Maiden in the car. It was blowing my mind.
One of the best moments, I think, in Stranger Things, the recent season, was when they're scrambling to get music, and Eddie picks up this Iron Maiden album, and we're like, no, we
Peace of Mind.
We need real music. And
he goes, we need something good.
Music.
He goes, we need good music. And he's like, this is good music.
It's great.
And he's right. It was. Peace of Mind is like a great album. And if people I was listening to, you know, I'll get messages. I was listening to Iron Maiden today and I thought of you. People I went to high school with.
Yeah. I mean, you become identified with that thing.
Yeah.
And it makes you feel good. Yeah.
You know, I started collecting the Funkos. They released the Funkos.
Oh, yeah.
All my Iron Maiden stuff, no kidding. My action figures, because McFarlane made some action figures. All my CDs, they're in my son's room. He took them all.
Mm.
So,
are you buying those Super 7 figures?
No, man. I would like to, but they're just too expensive.
Yeah, they're way too expensive. Well, yeah, I knew that you were going to talk about that because, I mean, that's sort of when I thought up this particular topic. I was like, well, I know we're going to talk about Iron Maiden. And I think that's really cool because, I mean, as with Matt, I've never listened to an Iron Maiden album, but I also appreciate the fact that they are one of the stalwarts. And old people like us, we we tend to appreciate older things, and especially when they sort of come just follow us along into the present day. And that, I mean, that's sort of what we're talking about. Stuff
Well,
that's followed us and that we continue to interact with.
their last album was competing with, I forget who the artist was, for the #1 slot. I think it was like, oh gosh, now I have to look it up. Drake. It was Drake. But it was amazing. I couldn't believe it that their album was running
Mhm.
neck and neck with a mainstream artist. It was like, wow, these guys are still selling records. It's amazing.
Well, to kind of transition from there, I'm going to talk about a series of books. And this is something that both of you guys will relate to and know about. So in 1991, they released Heir to the Empire. And so the expanded universe of Star Wars was born. And I thought it was great because at that time, obviously, we had nothing. We had no stories, no news stories, anything like that. So this was like an oasis in the desert. And, it was a #1 bestseller when it came out. And for each subsequent year, the first one being 91, 92, 93, in the summer of those particular years, they released the other books in that what was known as the Thrawn trilogy. And at the beginning, it was easy to keep up with. It wasn't overwhelming. And the same with the comic books. Dark Horse Comics started putting out comic books in 1992, and also at a slow rate that was easy to keep up with. Now, I kept up with the Dark Horse comics all the way up to probably about the year 2000. And then it just got to be, I couldn't keep up with it anymore. So for about 8 or 9 years, I kept up with it. And, but I think when I lived in Nashville with Mike, that's when I had to sort of just say, okay, I can't do the comics anymore. I'm going to focus on the novels. And every novel I joined the science fiction book club so I could get the special hardcover editions of all the paperbacks that they put out. I mean, I was like hugely into this.
Paperback
And
or hardback?
it was hardcover.
Yeah.
I got the hardcover versions of all the paperback books that they put out. I legitimately kept up with it all the way up to about 2008. So I went from 91 to 2008 with the novels. And the last story I read was something called Fate of the Jedi. And I couldn't finish it. I mean, it was so like boring at that point. I was like, okay, you're spending $25 on these hardcovers. Like at that point, it was like every 6 weeks. And I was like, so I had a backlog at that point. Like there's like 3 books I hadn't read yet and new ones keep coming out. And I'm like, I haven't finished the first one of these because it's a freaking snooze fest. But for that almost, 20 years, I rapidly followed the expanded universe of Star Wars in novel form. And I eventually it became so like convoluted and uninteresting to me that I just said, okay, I've got the line must be drawn here, this far, no further. And
Here. It must be drawn here.
The line must be drawn here. This far, no farther.
And it's about that time that I started to discover the wonder of digital ebooks. And I thought, well, I can really free up some of this shelf space with these hundreds of hardcovers. And I actually said goodbye to most of my collection in probably 2010, 2011. I actually transported in our car back up to Knoxville, Tennessee to visit family and friends to the mythical McKay's that Mike often speaks of, which is a fantastic used bookstore. And I unloaded most all of my hardcover Star Wars books, and I got about $300 for all of them. So, but of course, I probably had spent at that point like $5,000 on all that stuff. But yeah, it got to a point for me, and it was something that I really prided myself on for so long. Like, oh no, I'm keeping up with this. I know this stuff. And then it just was like it just kept coming, and I was like, stop. It has to. And there's probably an analog in there for sort of what happened with Mike and current Star Wars.
Well,
It's just,
I think I can piggyback on that story pretty well
yeah, I think so.
because I was a little later coming to the novels. I don't know why I didn't jump on the novels when they first started. But I remember there was a point, I think we were in Nashville, when I was like, okay, I'm gonna keep up with the novels. I'm gonna read the novels and I'm gonna keep up. And that's where me and Jared would talk about like, oh, I'm reading this now. He had already read it. But unlike Jared, I kept up with the comics. Like I still have all the Dark Horse comics up in my attic. But unlike Jared, I bought the paperbacks and I didn't buy hardbacks because I wanted it to be consistent. So I might, like, if a hardback came out, I might borrow Jared's hardback, but then I'd buy the paperback put in. And but like Jared, it was fun keeping up with it. And I think the reason that the original expanded universe worked so well is because it was Star Wars was done. So they were able to like just do kind of what they wanted. And there was consistency. They were conscious of making sure that the novels didn't contradict themselves, that the comics didn't contradict themselves. And when the prequels came out, the comics started doing these amazing Clone Wars stories. I mean, they had all these new Jedi characters they had created. And I mean, it was like, I really, really, really dug it, especially the comics. Now, the novels kind of started to fall off for me with the Yuzong Bong stuff, because that went way too long.
20 novels.
And that was it was like every novel, the rebellion was getting beat. It was like,
it was 20 novels over 6 years.
It was ridiculous.
That's a lot.
And then the next run was a little better. But then what was the last run of the old EU? What was that called?
It was Fate of the Jedi.
I never read that. I think I bought all of them and I never read them because Jared was like, oh, these are ho-hum. So, but I was keeping up with, and I was like making a timeline, like, okay, this goes here. Like my comics, I put in like in timeline order. And then, this happens here. And then whenever like a character from the novel would show up in the comic or vice versa, it was like really cool. But then, and then when Disney took over, they ended the EU. And a lot of people got really mad about that. But I was like, okay with it, because I knew there was no way Disney was going to be able to shoehorn their stories, because this expanded universe was massive. It
had been going for over 20 years at that point.
So I'm like, there's no way. There is no way they're going to be able to fit new stories in this universe. So I was like, okay, cool. The expanding universe comes to an end. The story still exists. You can still go and read these stories and enjoy them. So I was looking forward to the new stuff. And then the new stuff started coming out.
Yeah, it made you pine for the days of Fate of the Jedi.
And I think the problem is now they were locked in and they couldn't do anything interesting with these characters
because they wanted to make everything canon. Like if it happens in a comic book, it happens. So what they did, instead of taking big swings like they did in the old expanded universe, well, they couldn't touch any characters that you cared about because they were saving them for like the movies.
Yeah, they
So-
couldn't. There could not be any kind of life-altering event that could happen to them.
Yeah. And it even, you know, and they've now since even abandoned that because, you know, some stuff that occurred in Bad Batch, you know, was directly in conflict with a comic book that came out like 5 years ago. And they're just like, now they're just like, oh, well, you know, if it's on the screen, that's probably the most important.
But I think
So-
the novel that really ended it for me was that god awful
Say it. I know what you're going to say.
Chuck Wendig
Aftermath.
garbage heap of trash.
Oh, it was a dumpster fire.
Oh, and the way it was like what was it, first person?
No,
What the
it
hell
was
it?
it was third person. No, it was third person present tense.
Oh, it was so weird.
That's how it was written. So the
It was
way
like
it's-
listen to someone talk to you about the
yes,
story.
they're like, okay, so this
as
is
it's
how the book
happening.
was written. Okay, so this is the prose. Han Solo is going over there to do this, and Chewbacca is, oh, look at Chewbacca. It's like somebody narrating to you what's happening in real time.
Oh, it's
And
annoying.
It gave me a migraine.
And the story was terrible.
Yeah, because
It's layered on top of that. It was a terrible, terrible story. Introduce these characters
Okay.
that we didn't
Yeah.
care about. And
Yeah.
there was 3 books in that series, and I didn't get
Mhm.
past the first one.
I did audiobooks for the last 2 because audiobooks actually, it was like listening to somebody tell you a story, which it was better than reading it, but it's still it didn't go anywhere. So yeah, I mean, I think and now obviously, I mean, I don't even lift a finger with anything that's written, comic book or novel.
No, I gave up on the comics too.
And-
Comics weren't as bad, but it was the same thing. They were just boring. They just weren't interesting.
and a
They
lot of
were
retread. I mean, you go back and tell more stories about Anakin and Obi-Wan, and
yeah, and
that's stuff that Dark Horse did.
was
20
leaps
years
and
ago.
bound way was like so much better. It was
Yeah.
all that stuff was the stuff Dark Horse was doing, the stuff in the novel. Not all the novels were home runs, but man, for the most part, I mean, you were getting some pretty good stuff.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's certainly one that I would put on, like, that I was slavishly devoted to for years. And then eventually obligation and apathy. And I was just like, I got to stop spending money
then
on this stuff.
Then abandonment.
Yes, exactly.
I've got a book series like that.
Okay, what do you got?
I already know what I was going to say.
Do you? What do you think? So, well, no, Dune is an interesting one because like the first 6 novels, I've read them many times, and I like the original books from Frank Herbert. I did go into the extended prequels and all that garbage, and I was interested for a little bit, and then they just got terrible, and I gave up on that. And I don't really care about those books. I don't really like it. Like, to me, I don't need those books. I like the 6 books from the series.
Yeah.
See, I like up until God Emperor. I think God Emperor was really good.
I love them all, and I think they all have some really
Heretics. and
amazing
Jer-
things to add in. But that's not the series I was going to talk about.
Oh,
So when I was in middle school, now this is before like pocket books came out with the Star Trek.
It's Amelia Bedelia. Isn't
It's
it?
Amelia Bedelia. No, like in high school, like the Star Trek books were everything, and I wish I still had them. When I moved from Tampa to New York, I had like 2 boxes full of Star Trek books, and they were all like mildewed and gross. My garage is a disaster, and I had to get rid of them, which is a shame. But when I was in middle school, on my Commodore 128, we used to have this game called Dragon World, and it was like like all those old games, a little like screen would load. You got like the
Yes.
MIDI music in there, but it was a
Yes.
fun game. I really enjoyed it. It was a linear story game, and the cover to the video game said based on the best-selling novel, and I am
Mhm.
like, oh man, I want to read this book because I like the game. So I went to like Walden Books looking for it. I probably told this story when we talked about books, and they didn't have it. And what they did have was a book called Dragonflight by Anne McCaffrey,
I remember those. I
which
never
were
read 'em,
the
but I know
Dragon
what you're
Riders of
talking about.
Pern series.
Yes.
And I became like obsessed with these books. And this was the first time I ever read any fantasy books.
Mhm.
I had read sci-fi at that point, but I'd never read fantasy. So that's my first intro to like fantasy books, and I absolutely loved them. And I got like really, really into these books. And by the time I was in high school, I had a correspondence with Anne McCaffrey, who lived in Ireland, by about like 10 or maybe 12 letters back and forth. And
Wow.
and you
Like
know,
letters?
yeah, like I would write her and she'd write back, and
Holy
every
cow.
like twice a year I'd write her and she'd be like, so good to hear from you, and be like, hey, if you have any like great writing tips for like a new writer, she'd give me like all this stuff. I wish I still had them. I might have them somewhere, but they're probably long gone. But it was interesting, and I felt very engrossed in this world. And there's a lot of books. There's 24 books in that series, and it started with like 3, then it went to 6, then it expanded to like 9, and I was keeping up with it for a while. Like in high school, I wrote for a fanzine, and like I was really into this world. And then
A
it's got,
fanzine.
yeah, man.
Wow.
And it just got too, the books got too thin. They got too like stretched out for me, and I'm like, I can't do this anymore. And I kind of like let them all go for the Star Trek books. And I got heavy into those pocket books.
The pocket books.
Man,
Yes.
that was like my switch, and I never went back to the Dragon Rider series. But that was like a huge part of my like early reading days was those books.
You know what
Yeah.
I think happens is I think it's sort of like,
Oh, by the way, I finally got it.
yeah, I looked on Amazon. Hey, you know what
Finally
I'm
got it.
reading? I'm reading right now, and this could be a little small preview. Is I'm currently reading the novelization of Dragon Slayer.
I just downloaded that, so I want to read it before our
Well, now I have to do the same.
our
You
podcast.
punks.
But
Okay.
having
you-
said that,
You
I
have
think
you have the 4K. I don't. I'm just on the book. So
Okay.
4K looks great, by the way. And the
Yeah, it
special-
does. It looks really nice.
I heard it looks
Special-
great.
Special features are great, but that's for another time. But to what you're talking about, I think these writers get stuck in a rut, man. It's like they just, I guess I'll write another
Yeah.
Dragon's Pern book since
Yeah.
I need to pay off my mortgage.
Wow.
that
I'm gonna
sort
throw
of
one out
thing.
there. You guys, I don't know if you ever read them, but Anne Rice's Vampire series is a great example of that. Did you ever read those books? Any of those?
No.
So
I read the interview with the vampire.
I liked the interview. I liked Lestat, but like as you go on further in these novels, to your point, the repetition, the retelling of stories, and the thinning out of character development happens a lot. And that was another series that had potential. It just got wasted for me too. So
Yeah, my
I've-
wife, she read all of those.
I've currently started a series and I'm only in the second book. And I think there's like 16 books, and each book is like this thick. Is the Robert Jordan stuff? I read Eye of the World.
Wheel of Time.
Yeah, I read Eye of the World. I've really liked it. I'm almost halfway through The Great Hunt. And so far, I'm really digging it. I think it's like the closest I've ever read of anything I've ever read that comes close to Tolkien, but still having its own identity. And but it's hard. Those books are dense, and it's really
Really?
hard. Like if you sit down and read, you're sitting down to read. And when you're really busy, it's hard. But like I said, I'm only in the second book, but I'm enjoying it. I read them a few years ago and I could not get into them at all. I read the first and the second book. And I don't know, I guess because they're making that TV series, and I was kind of interested in looking for something fantasy. And I'd heard people say it was good. I read the Eye of the World and I liked it. I liked it a lot. So I'm hoping that A, I'll finish this series, and B, that it'll be good all the way through, because I bought all the paperbacks.
nice. I just started
Sure.
John Scalzi's Old Man's War. Have you heard of that one?
No.
In a quick nutshell, in the not so far future, there's an intergalactic battle that's constantly happening with an enemy of Earth. And what it is when you get to a certain age, like just say like 70 years old, you can opt to join the military. And but on the thing is, you go out, you fight, but you're never allowed to come back to Earth ever. But you're given a 25-year-old's body to fight. And that's what, like, it's like, that's your new life. So you're like an old man. You get, your trade-off is you get to have a young body, but you have to fight for the,
Oh, wow.
for this federation. And it's an interesting dynamic. I'm only just starting it, but you can see the intrigue in it. But, yeah.
Interesting.
Anyways, yeah, those are some book series of Utes.
Well, real quick, I do want to touch on Dune since we mentioned it, and just real quick.
Sure.
I think the last couple Harbert books aren't that great. I do like the Anderson and his son. They wrote 2 to finish out that series. I didn't think that was too bad, but holy cow, I read that there was 2 prequel series, 2 trilogies,
Right.
and I read that. Not
First
the
one.
first one that was published, the second one, which took place before the first
Oh, the
one.
way early one. Yeah.
And I have never in my life, when I finished that book, the third book, I think it took me a year to get through those because those books are not thin. I felt like what I had read was someone's first draft.
Yes. Yes.
And they just was like, and then this happens, and this happens, and this happens, and this happens, and this happens.
Well, that's the problem, right? You read the original Dune novels and the complexity of the writing and how dense the story writing and world building is. And then you go to the other books and you can see how basic the story is being told, how thin it is. And it's almost like it's such a different level of writing.
It's almost like someone's dictating.
Such a different level. It's such a different, and you don't really, you wouldn't think that it would be that different, but it's really substantially different.
It's just so, it's just, it doesn't feel like it comes together.
Yeah.
Like, and then the book ends basically on a cliffhanger. I'm like, are you kidding me? I read these 3 freaking books. It took me months to get through them, and they don't even wrap up. Are you joking? I was so mad.
You need some good, like, good Sardaukar throat singing to get over that.
I remember Matt bringing those to work, the hardbacks,
Yeah.
the Kevin J. Andersons. I knew even back then you were in it to win it, but maybe not.
I had to let it go. I had to let it go.
And they kept, I think they're still publishing them.
But I've gone back since and read the original Dune books at least 3 times since those books have been released. So I've never revisited those books. I read them once. I'm done with them.
I couldn't imagine trying to read those again. But there's like I read Paula Dune, which I thought was okay. It takes place between Dune and Dune Messiah.
Ugh.
But there was like the Sisterhood, it's just, and there's that TV series they're making. Never mind.
We could talk about authors all day long. In college, a buddy of mine and I were really both into Robert Heinlein, like Stranger in a Strange Land, Starship Troopers, Orphans of the Sky. And he was out to own every book that Heinlein had written. So he would always go to like Goodwill or Salvation Army and look for like books. And he did pretty well. He got a pretty good chunk. He must have, by the time we graduated, had 3/4 of the collection. But that was another big author. If you've never read any Heinlein, I highly recommend it.
Well, that reminds me, I've read Starship Troopers and I really liked it, but I also read Asimov's Foundation books. I read the first 3, which I really liked a lot.
I hear they're great.
But then there's like Foundation Earth and Foundation's Edge, and those books get really like what am I reading? What is happening right now? I have no idea what's going on.
Isn't that funny? I mean, I'm not obviously an author, but can you imagine writing a massive opus like this? Something so complex and world building, and you get to like the 5th or 6th book and you're living in that world in your head, and you're writing not just for like a reader, but you're just writing because you know it better than anybody, and it might not even make sense when you write it, but to you're the only one who it makes sense to. That has to be how a lot of these people are at the end. Even Frank Herbert, it must have been like that.
I think they run out of ideas.
I mean, look at,
I think like Stephen King's a classic example.
God,
like, you look at his
keep going.
Well, he just writes. It doesn't, and people will buy whatever. Like his first books, up until I would say like Pet Cemetery, like those are pretty much all winners. But then you get like the Tommy Knockers, and Misery's good, but then it's like I feel like it's just like no one. He's like a cash cow. Like no editor is going to read one of his stories and go,
yeah, right.
I don't know if this one's really that good. He's like, yeah, let's publish it. And it sells.
You tell him.
Yeah, you sell them a million copies of it.
Yeah, that's
Wow.
true.
Now, okay, I'm gonna do one more, and for me, this is my Iron Maiden, and it's the Beastie Boys. And I've stuck with the Beastie Boys for, well, I mean, of course, Fight for Your Right, 1986, License to Ill. I was 11.
Pollywog
and
soup.
that was actually prior, which, I didn't know about the punk stuff yet. But something about the Beastie Boys is now they're frozen in amber because
There will be no more.
Adam,
There'll be no more Beastie Boy albums.
yes, because Adam Yauch died. And I was pretty sad when I heard about that.
Yeah, I remember that. You were bummed out, man.
Yeah, I remember, when I remember hearing about that, me and Matt were in the theater and we just watched
We were into
first-
theater. That's
no,
what I
no.
said.
We were in a theater and we had just finished watching the first Avengers movie. And you had your phone out where you're like waiting for the post credits and you were looking at your phone and you're like, "Hey dude, look at this." But just for me, it's like, now they're finite. What they have is there. There's not going to be new music from them. I mean, Adam Horovitz and Mike D still they kind of do their own things, but it's not the Beastie Boys. Although Adam said just last week, he's like, there is a lot more stuff coming that we have that we're going to put out. There's a whole album they have that they did a documentary about them a couple years ago. And it was obviously just Michael and Adam, but they were talking about their career and everything. And one of their albums, it's the Hot Sauce Committee Part 1. They released Hot Sauce Committee Part 2, which was the last album they released. But Hot Sauce Committee Part 1 was this was the early 2000s, and this album, the entire album was on a hard drive that was stolen. And they had, I mean, there was no cloud then. There it was, they had disparate parts of it backed up, but the album was on this like book size hard drive, and it was stolen off a train.
Wow.
So for every Beastie Boys fan, is like, there is an album out there that somebody took of one of the Beastie Boys' last albums that's just somewhere out there. Maybe it's destroyed, maybe it's not, but they told this story, and it's just like unbelievable that something like that could happen. And everybody's saying, well, I bet you they found it, and that's what Adam's talking about. Anyway, for me, and of course, I would like to hear new stuff from them, but I'm kind of glad that since Yauch died, that they just said, the Beastie Boys is over, and what we have is what we have, and there's going to be drips and drabs leaking out over the next years and stuff, but I don't know. There's something interesting to me that this is a group that sort of began in my lifetime and they finished in my lifetime. And I still, as Mike says, I still celebrate their discography. So I think probably for me, that tops the list as far as loyalty and staying loyal to something. And for me, it's easy because, everything that's out there is out there. And they're not going to ruin their legacy with some terrible album like Chinese Democracy. So
that's a good point. I mean, same thing with me for Iron Maiden. They started they formed in, even though their first album came out in 1980, they formed in 76, which is 2 years after I was born.
Yeah, you were 2. So
Same thing with me with the Spice Girls. It just
yeah, they're truly timeless.
loyalty, everybody. Just like loyalty to this podcast, our fans, our listeners.
We appreciate your loyalty, and we hope not to make our own Chinese democracy someday. Although I think we probably put out a few episodes you may consider just as good.
Well, we'll cap that off with the chip challenge when we finally do it, right?
Oh my gosh,
you're breaking
Cowards.
Cowards.
Do this on a chip challenge.
So, I don't know. I can't hear you. I don't know.
I'm at the point that if you two will do it, I'll do it again.
You'll do it again?
Yes, I'll do it again if you two will do it.
I see. I don't think you have to. I think you can just play DJ for Chinese democracy as we're doing.
That's fine. I don't have to do it
listen
again.
to this. Has to be like our first Facebook Live.
Yeah, we'll do it. We'll live stream it.
YouTube Live.
We'll live stream that.
Man,
but
just to watch us disintegrate on camera.
No, but guys, we have a lot coming up in season 7. Some good stuff coming just down the pipe.
Some commentaries. I think we got some. We're going to be talking about some movies.
By the way, Mike has not watched season 3 Picard, and we're going to be giving our review on Picard pretty soon. So that's another one you don't want to miss.
We have also heavily encouraged Mike to watch season 3 of Picard. And I think, Mike, once you complete your journey through the Next Generation movies, it would slot in right after Nemesis for you.
Right. So,
and I'll be curious. I know one day you'll watch it, and I'll definitely be curious to hear your reactions. So that that's something that we will visit on the podcast one day, because Mike is going at his own pace with Star Trek, and he has about 800 hours of Dark Shadows to watch. And that's a whole other thing we got to talk about.
Oh, yes, another preview.
Okay, stay tuned for eBay counterfeit DVD box sets. You're not going to want to miss that one.
The problem is the story hasn't reached its conclusion yet.
I know. So it's still being written, so that's awesome. So, but anyway, thank you for joining us here in the 25th century, and we are going to leave you there. We are cranking out episode after episode now for season 7, so come back here next week, and we'll have a brand new one for you. So, until then, we'll see you next time.
You know you can't live without this content. So subscribe to the Hyperspace, podcasting in the 25th century. Follow us on social media, leave us a review, and join us next time as we take you into the 25th century.